Have you ever wondered what it actually took to run, like, a massive, self-sustaining country estate for a French aristocrat back in the year 1700?
I mean, it is definitely not what you see in the period
All right.
dramas.
It wasn't just some breezy summer vacation home where people lounged around.
Oh, not at all.
It was essentially a heavily armed, zero-waste corporate machine, like a place where skim milk was literal currency and where pregnant cows were honestly treated better than some of the human servants.
Yeah, the economics of it are just brutal.
Completely brutal. And today on the deep dive, we are basically stripping away the tapestries and the silver to look at the raw logistics that kept that entire lifestyle afloat.
Which is fascinating because we actually have the rule book for it.
Exactly. We are cracking open an incredible survival guide for the nobility. It's called La Maison Reglée, or the Regulated House.
Written by a guy named Audiger in 1700.
Yep. And our mission today is to dive into Book 2, starting around Chapter 10. We're going to map out the highly specific, rigid roles that kept a great lord's estate functioning, profitable, and secure while he was, hundreds of miles away in Paris.
Because to truly understand what Audiger is mapping out here, you really have to discard the modern idea of a country house.
Right. It's not a vacation home.
No, it is a completely self-contained ecosystem. It functions simultaneously as an agricultural hub, an industrial food processing plant, and a heavily policed private hunting reserve.
All rolled into one.
All of it. And every single person on the grounds had a hyper-specialized job. Like the margin for error was virtually zero.
Because if someone messes up,
The whole thing collapses. A mismanaged field or a spoiled batch of milk didn't just mean a bad financial quarter. It meant the staff starved.
wow. Okay, so before we can look at the wealth being generated, like the crops and the food, we need to figure out who is actually managing this powder keg on a day-to-day basis. Because if the lord is away at court, someone has to be the ultimate authority on the ground.
And the manual places that authority squarely on the shoulders of the Capitan de Chateau, the captain of the castle.
The top dog.
Exactly. He is the overarching manager, the absolute authority on site. His primary duty is enforcing the rules Audiger lays out, making sure every other domestic worker executes their highly specific tasks without, deviation.
But his role extends far beyond just internal HR, right?
Oh, absolutely. He is essentially the firewall between the estate's wealth and the starving countryside outside the walls.
Because the text notes he also acts as the captain of the hunts.
Yeah, making him basically the chief of a private police force. He polices the forests, the rivers, the fields. He has to stop local peasants from poaching game or illegally grazing their own starving animals on the Lord's land.
But wait, surely with the lord miles away in Paris for months at a time, the captain had every opportunity to become corrupt.
Oh, the temptation would be huge.
Right. Like, if he's the absolute authority, what's stopping him from skimming off the top, or taking bribes from those peasants, or just running the estate as his own personal fiefdom? Does Audiger's text talk about how the lord audited this guy? Or was it just blind trust?
Well, that is precisely why La Maison Reglée was written and published in the first place.
Uh-huh.
This book wasn't some novel. It was a standard operating procedure, like an SOP manual for aristocrats.
So the book itself is the audit mechanism.
Exactly. By codifying exactly what the captain was supposed to do and exactly what every other servant was supposed to produce, the Lord had a metric. It created this rigid architecture of expectations.
Because the captain couldn't easily lie about the numbers.
Right, because the manual dictated exactly how much grain a certain acreage should yield or how much wood should be cut. The entire system was designed with overlapping layers of accountability to prevent that exact kind of rural corruption.
That makes total sense. So the captain is essentially the CEO dealing with high-level compliance, security, perimeter defense, all that. But a CEO isn't out there plowing the fields in the mud. Who is the COO managing the actual dirt?
That operational burden falls to the Master-Valet or the Master-Valet.
The shift manager.
Yeah, if the captain is looking outward at external threats, the Master-Valet is looking downward at the soil. He is the absolute operations manager of the outdoor domain.
And what does he actually do day to day?
He commands the carters, he directs the plowing of the fields, and he oversees the massive, grueling seasonal pushes, specifically, the grain harvests and the haymaking.
Let's talk about the logistics of that, because the text gets highly specific about one of his duties. It says he has to ensure the land is properly manured before plowing.
Oh, this is a huge deal.
Right, and in a pre-industrial era, that couldn't have been as simple as just buying bags of fertilizer at the hardware store.
Not at all. Audiger uses the phrase, Bien faire fumer les terres. Literally, to well smoke or manure the lands.
Smoke the lands. I love that phrasing.
It's very evocative. But the logistics of this were staggering. We are centuries before synthetic nitrogen fertilizers.
So the only way to put nutrients back into soil depleted by wheat was animal waste.
Just tons and tons of animal waste. The Master-Valet had to orchestrate the collection, storage, and distribution of massive amounts of wet, heavy manure.
And timing is everything, right?
Exactly. He had to perfectly time the application of this fertilizer with the seasons, the weather, and the plowing schedule. If he applied it too early...
It just washes away in the rain.
Right. And if he's too late, it couldn't be plowed into the soil properly.
So the difference between a bumper crop and starvation for the entire estate hinged on this guy's ability to schedule the movement of literal tons of dung.
The estate ran on a nitrogen economy. If the Master-Valet failed at the manure logistics, the wheat failed. If the wheat failed, there was no bread. It was the absolute foundational gear of the entire agricultural machine.
Wow. Okay, so if the Master-Valet is managing the dirt and the crops, who is managing the estate's actual wealth, like the wildlife?
Because a field of wheat is just food.
Right. But a sprawling private forest teeming with animals, that is pure status.
Exactly. And under the umbrella of the captain's security force, you have this highly specialized armed team dedicated entirely to the Lord's leisure and the estate's prestige.
The gamekeepers.
Yes, the guard chess.
And their job sounds incredibly gritty. Like, it's not just walking around looking intimidating in a nice uniform.
Not even close.
Yeah.
They're doing the grueling, dirty work of maintaining a biological reserve. Oettinger's text describes them clearing the warrens of vermin, which he delightfully refers to as bêtes puantes.
Stinking beasts.
Stinking beasts, yeah. They are making baits, setting complex traps, and constantly patrolling the ponds and rivers in the cold and the damp.
And presumably dealing with those desperate locals we mentioned earlier.
Constantly. The peasants living around the estate were often living right on the edge of starvation.
So to them, a rabbit or a fish on the Lord's land was a matter of survival.
But to the gamekeepers, it was stolen property. Their job was to catch poachers red-handed, confiscate their tools, and report them to the captain so they could be hit with devastating financial fines.
They were basically the frontline infantry in a low-level, continuous war over calories.
That's exactly what it was.
Now, alongside those gamekeepers, the text introduces another role, le chasseur, the hunter.
Yes.
And he isn't just a guard. He reads like a highly specialized technician. Like, he has to be an expert marksman to provide game for the table, obviously.
Right.
But the text focuses heavily on his ability to train and manage dogs. It specifies he must work with both pointers and hounds.
The chiens, kuchans, and chiens kurals. Yeah, he's essentially managing the biological technology of the era.
Biological technology, I like that.
Well, a high-status hunt in 1700 required incredibly well-trained dogs to flush and track game. The hunter's value was tied entirely to his mastery over these animals.
Okay, wait, there is a detail in this section that really stuck out to me, and I want to get your take on it.
Sure.
The text explicitly orders the hunter to stockpile and preserve game in specific areas. Oettinger writes that he must conserver toujours le gibier de quelque canton, basically keep the game concentrated in a certain district.
Yes, he does.
If his job is to supply meat, why is he stockpiling live animals in specific zones? Is his job essentially to curate a rigged amusement park so the Lord is guaranteed a successful hunt whenever he visits?
You've hit on the exact psychological and social purpose of the estate right there.
Really?
Yes. For a great French lord, hunting was not about acquiring meat for survival. It was a high-stakes performance of status.
It was a flex.
A massive flex. It was a diplomatic and social event designed to impress visiting nobles or political allies. The hunter's job was to manufacture the illusion of effortless abundance.
Oh, wow.
He had to ensure that when the Lord rode out with his guests, the woods were just magically teeming with targets. It was an entirely curated artificial experience masking his wild nature.
That is mind-blowing. It's literally like stocking a pond with massive fish the night before a fishing tournament to make sure the boss looks good in front of his clients.
The politics of the 18th century were played out in those woods. If a visiting duke had a poor hunt, it reflected poorly on the Lord's wealth and power.
So the hunter was curating political capital.
Precisely.
Okay, so we have the men out in the woods guarding the elite game, and the Master-Valet moving tons of manure to grow the wheat. But who is actually converting these raw materials into survivable calories?
Because you can't just eat raw wheat and unbutchered game.
Exactly. We need to move indoors to what has to be the beating engine of the entire operation.
We do. And this brings us to the ménagère, the country housekeeper. She is the central node of the estate's domestic economy.
A text says she literally holds the keys.
She has everything under lock and key, which tells you everything you need to know about the value of processed food in 1700.
Calories were currency.
Absolutely. She sends the wheat to the mill to be ground, and then she oversees the baking of the bread. She doles out the wine or the drink rations to the staff.
And if you control the bread and the wine, you control the workforce.
Imagine trying to run a modern 100-person company where you have to literally lock the pantry doors. Because if your employees eat an extra slice of bread a day, your company goes bankrupt by February.
That puts an incredible amount of pressure on her. She's the CFO, the head chef, and HR all rolled into one.
She really is.
But where I was completely mesmerized by the text was her management of the basse cour, the farmyard. We talk a lot today about zero-waste supply chains, but the ménagère was running a masterclass in this 300 years ago.
The farmyard was where the estate's strict hierarchy physically manifested in food. The dairy is a perfect example of this.
Right, because she is responsible for milking the cows.
And Audiger notes that when the cows are calving and producing heavily, she must milk them up to 3 times a day, morning, noon, and night.
Wait, milking a herd 3 times a day produces a massive yield of raw milk. Without refrigeration, they must have had an industrial-scale preservation system just to prevent it from rotting within, like, 48 hours? What is she doing with hundreds of gallons of raw milk?
She immediately processes it to stabilize the fat and protein. The primary goal is churning the cream into fresh butter.
But that premium fresh butter isn't for the staff who milk the cows, is it?
Oh, definitely not. It is packed up and transported directly to the Lord, whether he is in residence or miles away in Paris.
But churning all that butter leaves behind huge vats of skim milk. And in a zero-waste system, she isn't dumping that out.
No, she uses the leftover skim milk to make dried, heavily aged cheese. And this dense, tough cheese is strictly for the domestic staff.
So they get the leftovers.
Yeah, but it becomes a critical protein source for the workers, particularly because of the religious calendar.
Oh, right, Lent.
Lent and the numerous other fasting days mandated by the church, where meat was strictly forbidden. The staff's physical ability to perform grueling manual labor on those days relied entirely on the ménagère's stockpile of skim milk cheese.
It's a perfectly calibrated 2-tier supply chain. The elite get the premium fat, the fresh butter, and the labor force is fueled by the leftover preserved protein.
And we see the exact same accounting of calories with the poultry and the pigs.
Let's talk about the poultry because that operation was massive.
She collected eggs from hens, geese, ducks, and turkeys, hatching them in continuous cycles to supply an endless stream of premium birds for the Lord's table.
And the pigs. The text talks about her fattening the pigs using the acorns gathered right there on the estate's land.
The French term is glande, the acorns. And acorn foraging is a very specific, high-end technique.
Because of the fat content.
Yes, the high-fat content of the acorns produces exceptional meat. The ménagère uses these acorn-fattened pigs to make premium hams, which are preserved and, again, sent upward to the Lord.
And what stays behind?
The lesser cuts. The heavily salted, tough meats and standard bacon stay in the estate's larder to fuel the domestic staff through the winter.
Every single calorie is accounted for, categorized by social class, and utilized. If she fails, what happens?
If the ménagère fails to properly salt the bacon, or if her skim milk cheese rots, the staff has no protein for the winter.
And if they have no protein?
They can't do the physical labor required for the spring planting. If the spring planting doesn't happen, the estate defaults. She's the linchpin, holding the entire financial structure together.
Which brings us to the very foundation of this entire system, because the ménagère needs a constant, uninterrupted stream of raw milk to make that butter and cheese.
Right.
And the Master-Valet desperately needs massive amounts of manure to fertilize the wheat fields.
Exactly.
The entire corporate ecosystem relies completely on the animals. And that brings us to the very bottom of the human hierarchy, the livestock guardians.
Audiger details the roles of both the burgher, the shepherd, and the vager, the cowherd.
Now, the sheep provided wool and meat, obviously.
But the manual gives us incredibly specific, intimate details about the daily life of the cowherd, because cattle were the heavy machinery of the estate.
Let's look at the cowherd's day, because after reading this, I don't think I'd survive a week in his shoes.
Not many would. He's the first one awake long before dawn. He has to get the cows milked early so the menagerie can start her massive butter churning operation.
And then,
Then, he takes his herd out to graze. But he isn't just watching a docile group of cows in a fenced paddock. He is managing a chaotic, mixed herd. Cows, pigs, foals, and donkeys.
all at once.
All at once, moving them across open land.
Without modern fencing, keeping a pig and a horse moving in the same direction sounds like an absolute nightmare.
It was. And the stakes were incredibly high. He had to fiercely guard this mixed herd to ensure they didn't wander into the estate's cash crops.
The wheat fields.
Yeah, Oettinger explicitly warns that the cowherd must keep the animals out of the héritage défendu, the forbidden inheritances, meaning the vulnerable crops. If the cows trample and eat the young wheat, the estate loses its bread supply.
The part of this section that really stuck with me, though, was the strict rules about animal welfare.
How so?
Well, the text is borderline obsessive about how the cowherd must treat the pregnant cows. It explicitly says he is forbidden from hitting them under any circumstances.
Yes, very strict on that.
He must carefully guide them back to the manor to give birth, and he has to personally ensure that every single calf nurse is on a strict schedule. Paired with the obsession over laying down good litter just to collect maximum manure, it really drives home a harsh reality.
Which is?
These animals weren't pets. They were the fragile, absolute economic engines of the 18th century world.
You've hit on the core reality of agricultural economics right there. This mandate for gentleness wasn't born out of modern sentimentality or animal rights.
It was pure, brutal capitalism.
Exactly. Let's trace the cascading economic failure of a single mistake. If the cow herd hits a pregnant cow and she loses the calf, that cow stops producing milk.
Which means the menagerie can't churn the butter for the Lord.
Right, and she can't make the skim milk cheese for the staff. Furthermore, a stressed or injured animal produces less manure, meaning the Master-Valet has less fertilizer for the wheat. A single act of cruelty by the cowherd could literally trigger starvation for the staff and financial loss for the Lord. Gentleness was mandated because the animals were the most valuable capital the estate possessed.
When you lay out the chain reaction like that, the entire estate feels like a house of cards. Or, well, maybe a highly calibrated clock. So what does this all mean when we step back and look at the whole picture? What is the real takeaway from La Maison Reglée?
The takeaway is that an aristocratic country estate in 1700 was a masterpiece of logistics and human control.
A completely closed system.
Yes, from the captain acting as the firewall against the starving countryside, to the hunter curating a political stage in the woods, to the menagerie's brilliant two-tier system of calorie management, every single person was a specialized gear.
They were all turning together in a massive, zero-waste, wealth-generating machine.
It was a world where survival required absolute discipline.
It profoundly puts our modern lives into perspective. I mean, today, we are so incredibly disconnected from our supply chains.
We really are.
If we want butter or a ham sandwich or bread, we just drive to the supermarket, tap our phone against a screen, and walk out. We don't see the gears turning.
No, we just see the final product.
But for you to survive in the year 1700, your supermarket would be a heavily guarded forest and a meticulously managed farmyard. It required strict behavioral rules, armed guards, and an absolute mastery of chemistry and preservation just to survive the winter.
We tend to view the past through this romantic lens of ball gowns and country retreats, but the reality was built on sweat, manure, and relentless accounting.
Exactly. So I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over today as you go about your modern, highly convenient life.
Oh, this should be good.
If you had to run your own household or even your modern business with this level of strict, zero-waste 18th century efficiency, who in your life would you actually trust to be your country housekeeper, holding the literal keys to your survival?
That is a tough question.
Right. And what is the premium game like? The absolute ultimate status symbol that you would need your gamekeeper to fiercely protect. Keep those gears turning, and we'll see you on the next deep dive.